Do you have a routine to get ready for this?
No, I don't, but just trying to ease in. There's a lot going on in the world.
Well, it's funny that you say ease in because you go from 0 to 60 in about 2 seconds.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out. And he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and you're listening to Dispatches from Planet Albany, a WCNY podcast about power and politics in state government. On today's show, we'll debrief Politico New York reporter Marie French about some of the big energy and environmental stories at the Capitol. But first, we're checking in with Shontell Smith, head of the New York practice for Tusk Strategies, where she is a partner. And Shontell, first, I wanted to let you know that despite the popularity of our first Ask Shontell Smith a Question segment, we have not gotten any more inquiries from listeners. Are you disappointed that there haven't been more anonymous questions coming your way from your fans?
Okay, so let me just tell you this. I went to the Business Council event. They had their legislative reception the other day. You know how many people were like, "Oh, I listened to you on the podcast," or they'll be like, "Oh, Wayne Lair, you think he looks like George Clooney?" Someone knew where I got married. I just got married, and I had never met the person, and they were like, "You just got married in Saratoga," like, blah, blah. And then I was like, "Am I saying too much on these podcasts?"
No.
And then apparently, you remember our first, the first podcast of the year where I was saying I was going to step on people's necks?
Yes.
I think some lobbyists were quite offended by it. And it's like, come on, y'all. Do you want us to always be boring? Can we just I'm not boring. And if you want me to be boring, it will never happen. So learn when I'm joking around and what's wrong with friendly competition? But people were quite offended by that comment. And it's for what? You guys don't have to ask me questions because you know what? I'm usually my hot topics, what I talk about, is what people are thinking about.
Well,
so I'm okay.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Business Council event because it is the season right now where interest groups are having their various functions. And this was a topic of conversation among the members of the LCA recently, which is this idea of so-called widely attended events where interest groups like the Business Council can host a gathering with free food and maybe some drinks, but not get in trouble.
The drinks aren't free. The drinks
aren't free. Okay. But they don't get in trouble.
So. I'm not drinking right now, but I don't think they're free because I could have sworn I saw a sign for cash.
Gotcha. Well, maybe the soft drinks are free then.
Okay.
Okay. But you don't get in trouble for improper gifts because they are, as I described, widely attended events.
Food from the zones, you think is a gift?
So I guess that's in the eye of the beholder, maybe for a legislative staffer like you used to be, this is a big deal. And I'm curious, as a former staffer...
Pause.
Yes.
No staffer's "Oh, you know what I'm doing tonight? I'm going to the Business Council."
No, they're not trying to get free food?
Gifts. They're probably getting free food, but guess what? They got to read a budget bill. This is the stupid shit I hate.
Okay.
I'm a staffer. I am working for the public. As we know, when you work for government, you're not money, you're not big mama at Tusk. You're medium mama.
Depending on what you're doing, yes.
Yeah. These people are dedicating their lives to public service, reading bills and doing the work. And you want to get mad because they're eating a free spring roll and a Diet Coke? Get out of here.
Wait, who's getting mad about it?
Well, you're not mad, but I hate when people are try to infer oh, these, staff is going. It's a nefarious thing to attend these events. People make a big deal about these events. Oh, they're going to be influenced. No, you're meeting someone that you probably don't even want to speak to, talking to you about clean energy, crabs. And I'm just doing random things. So people, get off my back. I'm not saying these things are stupid, but talking to you about some random thing when all you want to do is eat some chicken fingers and get back to your office because you have to stay and do work. Mm-hmm. So when I was a junior staffer, I would go to these things. senior staffer, like once we won the majority, I actually didn't like going to these things because it's so draining.
And I imagine people want things from you when you're senior counsel.
Watch how you use that language. They didn't want anything
Have
from me. They wanted
suggestions?
to talk to me about their legislation. We got to be precise with our language, please. So they wanted to talk about legislation or express some of their concerns. And you know what I wanted to do? Get something to eat and go back to my office. So that's why I stopped. Like once we won the majority, I never got my lunch outside. I would actually like order lunch and just eat in my office. I
Hmm.
would not leave my office. And then I absolutely had to because Taylor's all the time. Someone would be like, "Oh, Shontell, let me talk to you." Blah, 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 blah. And like, you just don't have time for it. I do think these events are good for networking. A lot of times sometimes you meet like other legislators. Like if you're in the Senate, sometimes you'll meet like a assembly person. And like, like you just don't know who you're gonna meet, or you're gonna meet like different business groups or just like people with interests before the state. Sometimes it's other like lobbyists. I do think these events are good, especially when you're junior staffers and you're not exposed to see like what the world is and who are the different players and people. As a senior staffer, like Jonathan Ling, the current head person at the Senate, he's not going, and I doubt Jen Best, the current head person at the Assembly, is going because you have so much stuff to do, and these jobs are draining. You don't want to talk to people.
And they can afford Uber Eats probably.
Yes, they can afford Uber Eats, and the junior staffers, some of them can afford Uber Eats too.
Well, was there back in the day a event that you did look forward to? I think about, say, Taste of New York or Dairy Day. Was there anything that you were particularly
Farm
excited
Bureau
for?
Day. Farm Bureau Day. You would get plants. You would get like I don't want to tell all my business. You would get those like little slushies that had like a little tints of little something like wine slushies.
Hmm.
You get like some good goat cheese. It was great. It was just great. It was just like a pick me up to like your everyday mundane people yelling at you, complaining and begging you to like amend or take bills off the active list. So I enjoyed that. I didn't get to go to Somos until I was more like higher up. And once we won the majority, I went to Somos. I wish I got to enjoy Somos the way other people did. Like if you're senior staff to a leader, you always have meetings. So like during the day, you're just in meetings. And even if you want to go out and like network and like, talk to people, you had meetings the next day. So it wasn't like a great time. Caucus became overwhelming for me
Okay.
because it's just so many events. And when I did caucus, I would have to staff the leader. Imagine walking down the hall and every like 50 yards, someone stops you. Oh my God, you're the leader. Can I take a picture? Oh my God. Shanti, take a picture. And then it's just like, oh my God, okay, yeah. And then you keep walking, and it's like, oh my God. It's like the same thing. It's like Groundhog's Day. You ever see Groundhog's Day? It's like,
Yes.
and at the end, and then like you're in, well, me, because I used to wear stilettos. And you're in stilettos, your feet hurt. You're like, so, yes, that's my take on these receptions and things like that. They're a good time to meet people. I would advise younger staff to go, like junior staff. But if you're a deputy or above, child, just bring your lunch or just eat at home. It's just not worth it.
Well, that was pretty much all I had for you, unless there was anything else this week
A
that
lame week.
you wanted to talk about.
No, I mean, I already did my rant to you before. I went on a whole, I mean, this is for the podcast people. I went on a whole like 5-10 minute rant about I'm feeling like there is a lack of direction or leadership about next steps. I just see a lot of things every day of chaos, and I just don't feel like there's a clear direction of what is the response to the chaos.
And your focus was primarily at the federal level, but what about here in New York? Obviously, the state attorney
I don't know what
general.
we can really do. Like
Well, the
we've
state
done
attorney general
everything.
just did a lawsuit with a coalition of other states, and the governor has addressed the challenges. Should they be more outspoken, or are they kind of already doing the extent of their powers?
I think this is where we live in a bubble, and I think we don't know that there's like real anxiety out there. And I don't mean to like shit on anybody, but like In New York City, they're doing raids, all types of stuff. Where's my mayor? In a bunker? Is he sick? Is he resigning? I don't know. I don't care. But like what is going on? On a state level, I think, the governor, the majority leader, and the speaker have passed every bill that they can. I will say for the budget, and I know people are going to hate me for saying this, there needs to be a contingency plan. In 20 whatever, when we had COVID, there was language in the budget that gave the DOB director the ability to revert back some money or pull back money in the event that we didn't get federal aid. I do think we have a unpredictable president, and there is Republican leadership in both houses on the federal level. So they basically can do anything. And we just have to anticipate certain things, and we just need to be mindful. And this smart legislating is obviously dealing with the needs of the constituents, but also anticipating things happening and just having a safety plan. And I'm not hearing nothing about a safety plan. And that concerns me. I would rather skip the check and you got money in reserves in case shit gets really deep. Because if we don't have federal money and people are not getting Meals on Wheels, SNAP, the things for our poorest people, that is problematic. And a 500 check ain't gonna help nobody. This is such a gloomy podcast for me today. And I apologize because I'm going to Vegas tomorrow to see Mariah Carey and I should be in a better mood. But I've just been waking up to chaos every day. And I don't know what is going on with the current political elite.
Well, it's in keeping with the overall mood of this episode because we already recorded with Marie French, and in terms of an energy level, on a scale of 0 to 10, she was somewhere in the negative numbers.
Trump basically said goodbye offshore wind and any type of renewable energy. So she must be on the cliff like Game of Thrones.
Well, I think she was also lagging because she sat through at least 9 hours of testimony.
The environmental hearing
24 hours ago.
Okay.
Well, we've been speaking with Shontell Smith. She's the head of the New York practice for Tusk Strategies, where she is a partner. Thank you so much, Shontell.
I'm going to bring positivity the next time you have me, whenever that is.
And we're joined on Dispatches from Planet Albany by Marie French, the energy and environment reporter at the Capitol for Politico New York. Thanks for making the time, Marie.
So great to be here, Dave.
So I should point out for listeners that we are recording this on Wednesday, less than 24 hours after the legislative hearing on the environmental conservation and energy portion of the budget, which lasted about 11 hours and 45 minutes. How much of that hearing did you sit through in hearing room B, and did you smuggle food into the hearing room?
I stayed until about 6 p.m. When I realized I hadn't had a full meal for 8 or 9 hours. So, yes, I will confess I did smuggle in some beef jerky from New Zealand, which was delicious, and some other snacks. So I was well hydrated and somewhat fed for this experience.
So during these budget hearings, when I used to actually have to sit through them, either at the Times Union or State Watch, I would also get annoyed by the questions that were being asked, often because they were mostly speeches. You are really living in the issues that can come up at a hearing dealing with the environmental conservation and energy portion of the budget. So did lawmakers bring up any questions that you would have wanted to ask, or were you silently screaming for most of the hearing?
I think lawmakers hit on kind of all the high-profile issues that are out there right now on the energy and environment front. The cap and invest rules, what's going on with that. What's the state's plan to achieve its 2030 renewable energy targets at this point? What exactly is this $1 billion for climate action going to be spent on? The answer is we have no idea. They kind of hit a lot of the highlights, a lot of the typical questions about consumer impacts and costs, concerns about various regulations and EV school buses. So a lot of the usual themes emerged.
And did any news emerge from the hearing? Because, as you point out, these are the questions that are kind of predictable, and I think you or even I could probably write most of the canned responses. So was there any news from the hearing?
Interim DEC Commissioner Sean Mahar did tell us that there's going to be regulations to implement the legislature's rules around cumulative impacts on disadvantaged communities and permitting. And, he addressed some issues around freshwater wetlands permitting. The department is kind of working on some solutions for developers for that. So, yeah, I mean, there's always some little nuggets like that are different, but, it's a lot of we're gonna work with you and negotiate with you to spend this $1 billion, and there is no delay of cap and invest. It's full steam ahead.
Yeah, let's talk about cap and invest, because this was obviously one of the issues that we.
I'm dying too. So.
Yeah, well, I guess. In light of how the Hochul administration has been slow playing cap and invest regulations for months and months, if not years at this point, and the experience we had with the last second overhaul of congestion pricing in 2024, were you surprised by the governor formally saying, we're going to put this off for some months now at the very least?
I am ashamed to admit that I was a little surprised, if only because my reporting days, a few days or weeks before, was that stakeholders were being told that this was happening and that this was going to be in the governor's state of the state plans and in the budget. So, yeah, I would say I was somewhat surprised in that sense. Then again, I had talked to people about the congestion pricing thing, and that was definitely still concern that was out there that, a similar delay could happen.
Well, it's interesting to hear you mention the stakeholders being caught by surprise here, because with congestion pricing, for example, the reporting has been that even the governor's director of state operations, Catherine Garcia, was caught off guard by the about face last summer. So have you been able to unpack at all at this point the decision-making process that led to the governor's latest delay of cap and invest?
It's really not clear. Agency staff had finished work on the regulations. They had actually sent them to the Department of State for sort of a technical review. They had sent them to the chamber for, a final run through. So these regulations, as complicated and, detailed as they're going to have to be if the governor decides to ultimately implement this program, they're written, they're ready for public comment from the agency perspective. But the Hochul officials have said, they want more input. So instead of releasing all three of these package, there's 3 different regulations involved in cap and invest. They're going to first do the reporting rules and get feedback on that. And but there's no timeline, right, of when cap and invest will be fully implemented, if it is implemented.
Well, putting aside the fact that if the legislature had to vote on cap and invest as a standalone issue right now, skeptical that they would approve it, is there anything the legislature can do to move this process along? We talked with Senator Pete Harckham, the head of the Environmental Conservation Committee, about this issue earlier this week, and he talked about some of the so-called soft power they might be able to wield in budget negotiations, but there's nothing that I'm aware of that can essentially force the executive branch into implementing regulations. Is there? I mean, is there some sort of legal action that could be taken to prompt this, maybe? Environmental advocates, I guess lawmakers could sign on to lawsuits as well, but there is a requirement in the state's climate law that DEC was already supposed to have regulations in place to achieve the climate goals. It doesn't say, cap and invest, right? It doesn't require them to do that. There was no timeline really in the budget deal that gave the legislature spending authority over any revenues. But yeah, I mean, the options are limited. Congestion pricing had a timeline, and that was also not necessarily stuck with. And you're right to point out that it's a politically touchy subject in the legislature. Do they really want to take a vote that Republicans will absolutely frame as raising consumer costs on the front end? Yeah, have you heard a framing of this issue by proponents of cap and invest that you think would be ultimately advantageous to Democrats, or is this the type of issue that you really want to be on the opposition side purely from a political points scoring focus?
Well, saying no to policies is always easier than, trying to figure out actually like what to do. The proponents of this program, have a pretty clear argument that returning a portion of the funds to consumers, targeting those rebates or however it would be structured to low and moderate income New Yorkers would cushion increased costs, at the pump or on their heating bills. It would be, a huge revenue stream for the state's efforts to transition to clean energy. And that money could be invested, to weatherize home, to further lower utility bills, to help people transition to electric vehicles. The governor certainly been out there making that argument for this program. And she has in some ways, but she's also, sort of carrying around the fact that she sent her top officials out to say it would raise gas prices more than 60 cents. I don't know, what was that, last 2 years ago?
2 years ago in the budget process, we got visits from Basil and Doreen telling us about how things were going to be much more expensive unless we changed the calculations.
Yeah, so it's kind of a little bit of a tricky proposition right now, and the governor's facing potentially a tough re-election.
Well, the bait and switch that we got was essentially no invest in cap and invest, but $1 billion over a 5-year period. When the comms people in either the governor's office or NYSERDA or DEC, whoever you're talking to, try to make that pivot, do they say it with a straight face, or do they have a bit of a smile like they know they're trying to sell bullshit?
You can't see my face right now, and usually I can't see their face because we're talking on the phone.
So there's not any sort of acknowledgement of, Jesus, Marie, I'm just doing my job. Please don't push me too hard on this statement I'm giving about how there is no delay on cap and invest, and this $1 billion is even better than any money you get from cap and invest.
I cannot comment.
Playing it close to the vest. I appreciate that, and I'm sure those comms people appreciate you not throwing them under the bus right now.
The electric bus, to be sure.
Yeah. Was there any sort of explanation about that transition and how the state is hoping to facilitate that? Because this week we also had the latest push from GOP lawmakers basically saying, sure, you can have an EV mandate, but just let everybody opt out of it if they want.
Yes, the mandate that you can self-exempt yourself from. There's still a lot of work that NYSERDA feels they need to do on getting school districts kind of familiar with this and really getting some of the resources out the door. It sounds like the upfront cost, differential, as well as, just charging infrastructure. I mean, utilities are struggling to figure out exactly how they can build out transmission lines and distribution infrastructure to get the electricity to where these buses would be parked, I guess, overnight. There's definitely, I think, a lot of uncertainty about that. I mean, the law does have limited time sort of waivers if school districts can't implement these goals, but it's a 2027 mandate to stop buying diesel buses and fossil fuel buses. So by that time, school districts will either have to figure out how they're going to charge the electric bus they're buying or apply for a waiver.
So we heard from interim DEC Commissioner Sean Mahar at the budget hearings, but you've reported that his successor is waiting in the wings. What should we know about the likely future DEC Commissioner under the Hochul administration?
It sounds like the governor plans to nominate Amanda Lefton. She's a pretty familiar face in Albany, actually. She worked for the Nature Conservancy for several years, was in the Cuomo administration for a short time. Well, I don't know how short, but a pretty standard amount of time maybe for working in the executive.
If you're not Rich as a party or Melissa DeRosa, it was a pretty standard turnover.
Yeah. She also, had the important position of heading up what we call BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, the federal agency that oversees offshore wind permitting. Her most recent post has been working for an offshore wind developer. So, she's a familiar face around here. It'll be interesting to see, what relationships she brings and what relationships she needs to build with the regulated community and the environmental community. So that'll be interesting to watch. She still has to go through the Senate confirmation process, of course, and the governor has not formally submitted her name at this point.
Has there been any reaction from environmental stakeholders to the nomination or the potential nomination at this point? Is anybody lighting their hair on fire over this yet, or is everybody, again, reserving opinion?
Frustratingly, sometimes people don't want to comment on not official nominations that Politico reports. It's hard to say.
How important is the DEC commissioner in terms of policy that originates from that department? Are they just a reflection of the governor, or do you think they actually have a certain amount of wiggle room, whether it is administration or setting regulations and policy?
Well, when Hochul started off her administration here, she kind of took a more hands-off approach, giving sort of the agencies a little bit more leeway on a lot of topics. But, ultimately the decisions on some of these hugely impactful programs, Cap and Invest, remain at the executive level. I don't think anybody would dispute that. So, yeah, if you have a commissioner who wants to advocate for certain policies, wants to, be in the room there, like trying to persuade the governor on what to do, making the case, that could have an impact. Ultimately, we've seen the agency heads, go out and tout whatever the party line is.
Were you surprised that Amanda is who the governor ended up with? Because thinking back to 2024, when Basil announced his plans to leave, I already began making jokes that Julie Tai was the commissioner in waiting, and I'm curious whether that made sense to you at the time, whether you thought she was going to be the potential commissioner, and if she was, did she shoot herself in the foot with some of her statements when the governor paused congestion pricing last summer? How have you thought about filling this vacancy?
Me filling the vacancy?
No, yeah. Not you as the person, but how have you thought about this evolving issue over the last 9 months?
Julie Tai was certainly a top contender for this position. Her name did come up in a lot of conversations I was having with folks. It was out there that she was in the running. Multiple people have told me that she actually withdrew for personal reasons sometime late last year, I believe, from consideration. So take from that what you will, I suppose.
Were there any other names that you heard bandied about for the commissioner post?
There were like a handful of other people who were like mentioned. Someone from the Attorney General's office, somebody I think who was at SUNY and works on sustainability issues. Yeah, so like a couple other names were definitely like out there in the discussion.
Well, we've been speaking with Marie French. She is the energy and environmental reporter for Politico at the Capitol. Marie, thank you so much for the time. Please feel free to go take a nap and maybe do an adrenaline shot. I really appreciate it.
I will try to make it through today. Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate it.
These consultants were so mad that I said that stuff. And at least,
What time? What time?
My husband just made me lunch.
Then what else could make you lunch?
Bye. Bye.